Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video we are doing a pattern review and a sew along. So you guys been loving these pattern review sew along style videos, and I'm going to continuously bring them to you as long as I have things to do, okay? All right, so before we get started, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe button, and also turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So without further ado, I'm not gonna take too long. I'm gonna go ahead and get into this quick pattern review, and then of course, off to the sew along. All right, so listen, this sew along is part of the 100 likes that I received on video number 140, which was Simplicity 99-cent sale for when I picked up some patterns for a young lady in the Commonwealth of Dominica. In that video, I said if I got 100 likes on the video, I would do a sew along. Well, listen, I didn't forget about it, and I did write it down. However, when I went to sew this pattern back in February as a test muslin, because I have never done a asymmetrical button down shirt, I was like, I wasn't feeling it. So I said, well, then at the same time, it was a peach fabric and it was just too sheer and too see-through. I didn't love it. So I said, okay, let me revisit it when I pick up some fabric that's, you know, not so sheer. So I picked up this fabric from Joann's, and I'll talk about it here shortly. So let's go ahead and get into the pattern description. So the pattern description for Simplicity 9106, which is the pattern that I'm reviewing today. It is a Mrs. and Women's button front shirt. It's an asymmetrical button front shirt. It has sleeve and collar variations. Now in the front, it has a bust dart, but it also have like a curve shaped hem as well. It has 10 buttons along like an asymmetrical style button. So that is the pattern description for this pattern. Let's get into the skill level. So on the Simplicity website, it is rated as average, which means intermediate beginner. Do I feel it's an intermediate beginner? Absolutely. I think that average is what you need to call this, simply because if you have never done like a Japanese style shirt, which this is what it reminds me of. It reminds me of a Japanese culture inspired shirt. So I tried to get some fabric that, you know, kind of go with it a little bit, but not offend anybody, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, I think this was great to have it put in as average, intermediate, beginner instead of a beginner friendly pattern. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about notions used. So the notions used for this pattern is 10 5/8 inch buttons. Now, I did not have 10 5/8 inch buttons, so I went a step up and used 3/4. Now, what that meant was, on the front of my collar area, the asymmetrical, I had to make the stitching line a little bit wider. Why? Because normally it's at 5/8 of an inch. I had to make mine 1 inch to be able to have the buttons right here along the asymmetrical part and still not distract from what it's supposed to look like. So that's what I did, and it worked out. But that's the only notions that you need in order to construct this pattern. Let's talk about, of course, the fabric used. So the fabric used for this pattern, I picked it up from Joann's a while back. I think I picked it up in January, maybe February, for this fabric. And the fabric is called, I'm gonna put it up on the screen, Keepsake Calico Pink Flower from Joann's, okay? I love this fabric. I purchased 3 yards in order to do this button front, asymmetrical button front shirt, but I think I should have purchased at least 5 yards. And the reason why I say that is because after I did the top, I felt like I needed some pants or some shorts, okay? I didn't do either or, and I did not make a second piece. It's just the top, and that was it, okay? So let's go ahead and get into the pattern pieces. Now, I'm not going to get into naming every single pattern piece simply because you'll hear it in the sew along, but you need 8 pattern pieces in order to construct this pattern. Let's talk about pattern sizing. pattern sizing for this pattern, it comes in 2 envelopes. So you have a missus pattern, which is 10 to 18, and then the woman pattern, I believe, is 20W to 28W. The size that I cut was a size 16. However, I did have to make modifications, okay? Now, the modifications is basic modifications. So no, I did not do any modifications, but the modifications I did was I did have to enlarge the bust because I believe for a 16, it stopped at like a 42, I believe. I'll put it up on the screen if I'm incorrect. And I needed to do a 43-inch bust. At the waist, it was smaller than what I needed, so I had to enlarge the waist and the hips as well. So I did a lot of sizing up for the size that I needed, but I cut the sides as close to my bust as possible without having to go into the woman's sizes and then the waist is off. I would have either had the right size bust and the wrong size waist and hips. So, I mean, I always have to pretty much make adjustments to a pattern. So I'm used to it by now, all right? All right, so let's talk about, did it look like the photos or the drawing on the pattern envelope? Yes, it does. I was shocked and I was surprised simply because I didn't make any modification, but because if you look at the pattern envelope, she doesn't have a busy fabric. It's just plain Jane, you know what I'm saying? But I think it looks exactly like the pattern envelope. I didn't do nothing nothing different. All right. Let's talk about are the instructions easy to follow? So yes, they are for the most part easy to follow, but because this was the second time that I did it, I did follow with the instructions as much as possible, but I did not go in order, and you'll see that in the sew along, and you'll hear me say that in the sew along. All right, let's talk about likes and dislikes. Okay. You know, I have to give the dislikes first. So when I sewed this back in February as a sew along, but then I deleted every footage that I had simply because I didn't like it. And if you know me, or if you have been following my channel, if I don't like something, I'm gonna tell you guys I don't like it, and here's the reason why. And that just helps you guys in pattern review to see what it is that I looked for and what did not work out for me. It may work out for you, but I just want to give you my honest opinion about different patterns so you can save yourself the headache. So when I sewed this back in February, I did not like it. I did not like it. I put this pattern away for 4 months, okay? Actually, yeah, almost 5 months, 4 months. I just put it away because I cut it in January. I sewed it like the end of January, and I started doing this top the end of June. So, I mean, that just lets you know that I wasn't in love with the top. So when I picked up this fabric, and I actually finished it yesterday, to be honest with you. I finished the top yesterday, and my daughter was making buttonholes for me. If you checked out my Instagram stories, you will see that she marked the buttonholes for me. I made the buttons, but she marked the buttonholes for me because she is my little helper, okay? After that, we put it on the mannequin. It looked gorgeous on the mannequin, but when I put it on, and I'm gonna tell you, I didn't have my face done. My hair was down. It was not pinned up or anything. I was like, oh, here we go again. I did not like this top. I did not like it. I sent it to my sister. She was like, oh, it's fine. I love it. And I was like, do you like it better tucked in, or do you like it, you know, not tucked in? She said, do not tuck that top in. You look old if you tuck it in. All right. So I went with her advice and did not tuck this top in the photos. Okay. So after doing that last night, while I was sitting at my cutting table, just kind of, you know, thinking of how I'm going to style it today, because I just took these photos this morning, early this morning. I said, well, you know what? I think I'm going to style it 2 ways. I'm going to wear some ripped jeans, and then I'm going to style it with my khaki shorts that I made for the Chip and Dale collaboration that I did with Eris from at Sewing and More. And what I did was, I did not sketch it out, but I just kind of like wrote it down from the sketch that I made for the asymmetrical blouse. I loved it. So then it became, okay, it's not a dislike, it's light. And I'm glad that I kind of did a save the fabric kind of thing, but I do like this top now that I, you know, styled it 2 separate ways. To be honest, I like it with the shorts a little bit better than with the jeans, but you tell me which way you like it. Would you prefer it with the ripped jeans or would you prefer it with the shorts? You tell me in the description box below which way you like the photos. All right. Make sure you do that in the description box below. Awesome. So let's get into what I sewed again. I don't think I would sew it again because I don't need many of these in my wardrobe. I think one and done is good for me. Would I recommend this to others? Absolutely. I would recommend this to others to at least have one, but I wouldn't say that this would be a pattern that you would reach for over and over again unless this is your style. So to me, this feels more like a vintage 1950s style because I know there is a dress that's similar to this. I can't tell you the pattern number right now off the top of my head, but I do like vintage patterns. It's just I don't sew with them very often. But I think that one and done is good for me. First time experiences. Do I have a first time experience? Absolutely. This is the first time I did an asymmetrical anything. Okay, so this is the first time I did an asymmetrical button down shirt. I have never done an asymmetrical, you know, dress, well, button down dress or anything like that, or an asymmetrical button down skirt. I have never done anything that's asymmetrical button down anything. So that is my first time experience. All right, so let's talk about my pattern rating. My pattern rating, I'm going to stamp this a 4 out of 5. Not because I dislike it. It's just, you know, not like, ooh, I'm gonna sew it again, but it's all right. I might sew it again. But if I sew it again, I will probably make some pants to go with it in a solid color or the same print and just kind of make it do what it do. All right. Well, that's it for the pattern review. And now that we talked about the pattern review, let's go ahead and get right on to the sew along. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the next sew along. And this is the sew along as part of the 100 likes that I received on the video for, I think it was the Simplicity 99 cents pattern. So today we will be doing Simplicity 9106, which is an asymmetrical button down shirt. So I'm not going to get into the whole supplies or whatever because it's basic supplies that you're going to need. You're going to need the pattern. I cut with rotary cutters, 1 for paper, 1 for fabric. I never mixed the 2 there. Scissors, 1 for paper, 1 for fabric. I never mixed the 2 there. You will need some pins to hold your pieces together. Rotary cutter, just in case you make a mistake and need to rip out any seams. Your point turner, marking tools, of course you're going to need. And then you need 10. Now, I believe the back of the envelope says 1/2 inch buttons. It actually says you need 10 5/8 inch buttons if you're men's sizes, or 3/4 inch buttons if you're women's sizes, but you need 10 of those. So I am using 10 3/4 inch buttons because that's what I had in my stash. Okay, now the size that I am cutting is a size 16. I did need to do some grading up, and I will show you a little bit of that, of how I'm going to enlarge my pattern just a little bit. But those are all the tools and supplies that you need in order to construct your garment. So let's go ahead and get right on into the pattern pieces. All right, so let's get into the pattern pieces used in order to construct this asymmetrical button-down shirt. So the first pattern piece is pattern piece number 4, which is your left front facing. You need to cut 1 of fabric, 1 of interfacing. I know I do not have my interfacing on there yet, but I will add my interfacing to it before I sew it. You also need pattern piece number 3, which is the right front facing. You need to cut 1 single layer of fabric and then 1 of interfacing. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 6, which is, this is pattern piece number 9, which is your collar. You need to cut 2 on the fold of fabric and also cut 1 on the fold of interfacing. And make sure you have your pattern piece with the wrong side up, the right side of the pattern facing down on the fabric. Now this one you will need pattern piece number 8, which is your buttonhole guide. Now you do not cut this out of fabric whatsoever. It's just a guide for you to mark your buttonholes once you completely sewn your top together. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 7, which is your sleeve. You need to cut 2 of fabric. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 1. This is your right front. You need to cut 1 of fabric. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 2, which is your left front. You need to cut 1 of fabric. And the last pattern piece is pattern piece number 5, which is the back. You need to have the wrong side of the pattern facing up on the fabric, the right side facing down on the fabric, wrong side facing up, and you need to cut 2. Now that I talked about the pattern pieces, I want to show you some modifications that I will be making and how you can do the same. So the first thing is your waist. I'm just going to show you this on camera. So I'm going to move my fabric out of the way quickly so you can see it on the table. So I have pattern piece number 2, which is the left front, okay? Now I marked where my bust is, my waist, and my hips. Now in order to find your waist, you need to measure about 5.5 inches down from your bust in order to get your waist measurement. And then, from your waist to your hips is 5.5 inches is what I measured down, okay? So for the bust, I measured across. The size that I cut was a 16. I know I wanted roughly about 43.5 to 44 inch bust to give me a little bit of room. So I measured across. I got 12.625. The seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, so it's going to be in case 5/8 on the front, 5/8 on the back. So 5/8 plus 5/8 is 1.25. So that's the seam allowance removed, which gave me 11.375. I'm going to measure that same amount on the back pattern piece across as well as the front pattern piece. Add those numbers together and see what my bust is. Same thing for the waist and the hips. That's why you see that there are basically I had to size it up a little bit for my waist and my hips based off of what I got on those measurements, okay? So now that I talked about the modifications that I have to make to size the pattern up, let's go ahead and get right on into the sewing. So let's go ahead and get right on into the sewing of the asymmetrical button down shirt. So the first thing I need you to do is grab pattern piece number 1 and pattern piece number 2, which is your right front for all views, and your left front is pattern piece number 2. So the first thing you're going to do, I have already done this to save time, but the first thing you're going to do is stay stitch the upper edge of your shirt or blouse, and then after you stay stitch in the direction of the arrows like you see on your instructions, after you do that, you're going to go ahead and make your darts. You're going to pinch out your darts, make your darts, back stitch at the beginning, but do not back stitch at the end. Just pull up some thread and tie it 2 or 3 times and then press your darts down. After you press your darts down, the next thing you're going to do is go ahead and create 5/8 of an inch basting stitch along the hemline of your blouse, okay? That's at the very bottom. You're going to do that for both your left front and your right front. Now don't get confused with what is what, you know, which piece is what. So it's best if you go ahead and put like a little X in the number on the back of your pattern piece. Now my fabric is not the same on both sides, so I'm able to determine what side is what, okay? So once you do that, go ahead and move your front pieces out of the way. Grab your back pattern piece, which is pattern piece number 5. And what you're going to do is go ahead and stay stitch the upper edge of the back pattern piece as well, which I have already done that to my back pattern piece. So after you stay stitch the back pattern piece with right sides together, you're going to pin the center back. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and pin at your notches. So there's 2 double notch right there, pin at your notch, pin at the top, and pin at the bottom, and then pin along the seam allowance of your back. So pin along the top or the edge of your center back. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the center back pin using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch, I'm not gonna say this several times, but a regular length stitch is 2.5 inches on your sewing machine. Basting stitch is the longest stitch on your sewing machine. So using a regular length stitch, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then finish off your seam allowance. Go ahead and do that now. After you do that, go ahead and create a basting stitch at the hemline of 5/8 of an inch seam allowance like you did on the front. Go ahead and do both of those things now. All right, so now that I have my center back seam sewn, what I did was I finished off my seam allowance and pressed my center back to one side. After I did that, I did some top stitching just to basically to keep the center back pressed to one side and I don't have to worry about it. Plus it gives it a little definition. So that's why I did that. And then I went ahead and based along the hemline at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now that I did that, go ahead and what we're gonna do is we're gonna attach front to back at the shoulder seam. So go ahead and grab your front pieces and with right side together, you want to pin at the shoulder seam. Now make sure that you are pinning the right front to the right front side of your blouse and then the left front to the left front side of your blouse when wearing it, okay? So it should look like this and it should have this little asymmetrical hem going on at the front. And what you're gonna do is match up your notches right here and then pin across your shoulder. So go ahead and pin your shoulder seams now. All right, so now that I have my shoulder seams pinned using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end and sew across your shoulder seam and then finish off your seams and press your seams towards the back. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the shoulder seam sewn and finished off and pressed towards the back, the next thing we're gonna do is the sleeves. Now I know in the instructions it tells you to do the collar, but we're gonna go ahead and do our sleeves and our side seams, okay? So I have one sleeve in right now. Now you guys have seen me do sleeves so many times, so I'm not gonna necessarily walk you through how to do a sleeve, but go ahead and open out your blouse with the U or the arm's eye facing up on the table. Now for your sleeve, what you're going to do is create a 2 rows of basting stitch. I used 3/8 in order to create my gathers. I did the first one at 3/8 and the second one at a 1/2 inch. I have set this in many sew-alongs and tutorials as well. Now what you're going to do is go ahead and serge the bottom edge of your sleeves, press up 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and then stitch on the right side. So go ahead and make your gathers and go ahead and do your hem. And then what you're going to do is with right sides together, the first thing you want to do is match up your dot that you have at the center of your sleeve and then pin there. Once you pin there, you're going to match up your single notch, which signifies the front of your sleeve, which is right here, and you're going to pin there and then match up the double notch, which is the back of your sleeves. You're going to pin there. So I have my double notch here and we are going to pin at that double notch, and then you're going to pin the length of your sleeve, making sure you pull up gathers if you need to, and if you don't need it, you just let it out. So go ahead and pin around your arm's eye or your sleeve cap now. All right, so now that I have the arm's eye or the armhole seam pin using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, sew your seam and then finish off your seams. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the underarm seam sewn, now what you're going to do is, so basically it's going to look like this with the underarm seam sewn. You're just going to basically, with right sides together, you're going to sew your underarm seam for your sleeves and your side seams at the same time. You guys have seen me do this before. So just match up your underarm seams and pin there. And then just match up your sleeves, the seams on your underarm seams for your sleeve. You have a notch there, so pin there, and then pin along the length of your sleeve. So go ahead and do that now. Now that you have the underarm seam of your sleeves pinned, go ahead and pin your side seam, matching up the notch. Make sure you have your dart pressed down. So you're going to match up this notch, pin all the way down the side seam of your blouse. Go ahead and do that now. Now that I have my side seam and my underarm seam pin using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, sew your seam and then finish them off. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my sleeves sewn in on both sides, I'm gonna show you that. So now that I have my sleeves sewn in on both sides, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and start working on the collar. So go ahead and move your blouse out of the way quickly and grab pattern piece number 9, which are your collars pieces. And the first thing you want to do is on the collar that's interface, the top portion where it has notches, you want to press under 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and then trim it down to 1/4 of an inch. All right, so I have already done that. So the next thing I'm going to do is, with right sides together, I'm going to pin the sides and the bottom. So basically what you want to do is match up those dots. So I'm just going to turn it over so you could see. So you're going to match up the dots and pin the sides and the bottom. So go ahead and pin now. All right, so now that I have the collar pin using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting at this dot, back stitch at the beginning, sew down. When you get about 5/8 of an inch from this corner, you're going to pivot, sew across, pivot again, and then sew back up to this dot. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Once you do that, go ahead and trim your seam allowance down, turn it right side out, and give it a press. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my collar sections stitched together, right sides together, I went ahead and did some understitching on the facing. Now the facing is considered the side that does not have the inner facing. Your collar section is the actual side that has the inner facing. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how they have it in the instructions, okay? Now go ahead and grab your blouse. And if you need to clip to the stay stitching, you can. That's completely up to you. But what you're going to do is, with right sides together, you're going to attach your facing piece. This is the portion that does not have the inner facing to your collar, matching up those notches first. So match up both notches. Make sure to keep this portion that's interface out of the way, because you do not want to sew on that. The dots will match up with your shoulder seam. Just make sure that the seam allowance is pressed towards the back of your garment, and you're going to pin both sides. And now what you're going to do is, this edge matches up with this dot. So you're going to pin right there too. There's a dot there. Pin there too. Now just put some pins along the upper portion of your blouse. Go ahead and do that now. All right, now using 3/8 of an, now that I have it pinned, using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, backstitch at the beginning and at the end and sew across your collar. Go ahead and do that. Now, after you do that, press your seam allowance up towards your collar after you give it a trim down. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have my collar done, it's attached to my blouse. I press the seam allowance up towards the collar. The next thing we're going to do is start working on our facing. So you have a right, I'm gonna move my blouse out the way so you can see this on camera. You have a right front and a left front facing. Now the first thing I did was go ahead and finished off the area, the side that does not have the notches, okay? So go ahead and finish off the sides that does not have a notch. Now in the instructions it tells you to fold in 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, trim it down, and then press under that 1/4 of an inch. I did not do that because I don't see the need. All I did was serge my side seams, okay? So now that we did that, go ahead and grab your blouse. And what we're gonna do is with right sides together, we're going to attach our facing piece. Now, the first thing I'm gonna do is grab my right front, because this is the right side when looking at it, right? So you're going to, you have a dot right here, so that dot matches up to this dot up here at the very top. And you're going to pin there. So let me turn it so you could see it. And then you're going to pin at the notches that you have. You have double notches right there. You're going to pin there. And then you're going to pin the length of your blouse. So go ahead and pin the length of your blouse now. All right, so now that we have our facing, our right front facing pinned to our blouse, now make sure you pin it over your collar. But you want to make sure that this portion of your collar is not sewn, because what you're going to do is you're going to pin it over your collar, making sure that the collar is underneath that. So make sure that you have it pinned correctly, because it makes a big difference when you turn it, when you trim it down and turn it. Now, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to backstitch at the beginning and sew all the way down to the hem and backstitch at the end. The hem or the end, okay? Trim it down and press your seam allowance towards your facing. You're going to do the exact same thing on the other side as well. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so I went ahead and sewn on my right front and left front facing, okay? So one thing that I did not mention is, I'm going to mention it now. I'm going to show you on this side, but after I attach it, at the very top, you need to pin and sew 3/8 of an inch seam allowance from where you've stopped stitching all the way over to the dot. You need to do that, okay? After you do that, when you need to understitch your front facing. After you understitch your front facing all the way up, you're going to mark 5 inches from the hem, okay? And on the inside curve where you finished off your seam, you need to sew as close to the edge as possible. I did about 1/4 of an inch. And you need to go 5 inches from the bottom up, start there and sew all the way up your facing piece. So it looks like this. You'll see basting stitches on the right side, but you will remove those once you start putting your buttonholes on, okay? So you need to do that on both sides. After I did that and finished off my facing, right, well, basically pressed it and all that good stuff, the next thing I did was went ahead and add my label to the center. Now remind you, you have 2 notches right here and a center back seam, so you want your label to match up with that center back seam, the middle of your label, okay? So you put your label in now, because once you attach your collar to your blouse, you're not going to be able to do it unless you hand sew it, or you'll have stitching on the wrong side of your collar, and you don't want to do that, and that's not a good look, okay? So now that I have everything pressed up, the next thing you're going to do is go ahead. Now I am going to stitch in the ditch. You can definitely hand sew if you would like. That's completely up to you. But this is like a fun blouse that I'm going to be doing. So I'm just going to make sure that my seam allowance is pressed up. I'm going to pin on the right side of my blouse, and make sure that you are pinning this pressed edge about 1/8 of an inch over the stitching line that you have there, okay? And this just pin on the right side of your collar. Go ahead and do that. Pin all the way around and do that now. All right, so now that I have my collar pin, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, actually it's 3/8 on the pattern instructions. So using 3/8, I'm just gonna stitch in the ditch. It says 3/8, but I'm going to stitch in the ditch along my collar, okay? Now, after I stitch in the ditch, that's why I have it pinned. The next thing you're going to do is go ahead and finish off your facing piece. So just make sure you are within 5 inches from the bottom. All you're going to do is take your facing, fold it onto itself, and pin. So you're just gonna pin there and there. And I'm gonna do this to the other side so you can see again. And then you're just going to sew across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to show you on the other side as well one more time. You're just going to take the facing, turn it onto itself, so it should look like this, and pin. And then you're going to go to the sewing machine using a regular length stitch. You're going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end and sew across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So go ahead and do your collar and your facing now. All right, so now that I went ahead and finished off my collar section, I went ahead and sewn my facing. Let me show you that. I sewn my facing and turned it to the right side. Now I'm going to show you on this other side. I have shown you guys this before, but I'm going to show it one more time. So when I turn it onto the wrong side, I stitched across 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I take my scissors, I clip the ends, go across, and I only remove this top layer of this peak, okay? So that top layer is the only thing that I am removing, okay? You leave that bottom peak there. Now I'm going to turn it to the inside and take my point turner and poke out that corner, okay? Now you have a nice clean finish to your facing, okay? Now I'm gonna turn it inside out, right? So you can see this. Now, there's two things that you're going to have to do, and I'm gonna let you do this on your own. Now, I went ahead and searched the bottom edge of my blouse. So what you're going to do is you have that stitching line that you made at the very beginning at 5/8 of an inch. You're just going to press up. If you just doing the way that I'm doing where I just serged it, you're just going to press in that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, if you want to do a double fold to where your raw edges do not show, you're going to press up 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, open it out, press to that line, and then press again and stitch on the right side, okay? The right side of your blouse, all right? So I'm just going to press it in and then sew, because this is gonna be just kind of like a fun blouse. I can wear it to work, I can wear it on camera, I can do all of those things, but that's what I'm going to do. All right, now the only thing that you have left to do is two things. You're gonna change this basting stitch to a regular length stitch. Same thing, you're just gonna basically cover it up. Now what I'm going to do is using a regular length stitch, I'm gonna sew as close to this basting stitch as possible, not on it, and then remove the basting stitch. I'm gonna do that on both sides. After I do that, I'm going to take my buttonhole guide, okay, and you have a portion that says top. you're gonna place, now let me move everything out of the way. You're gonna have your blouse on the table or your cutting area, whatever you use. You're gonna make sure all the rest of your fabric is to the left of you. That's how you know you have it the right way and you're marking on the right portion. You're gonna take your buttonhole guide and you're going to make your buttons, you know, basically along the blouse area, okay? All the way down. I'm not gonna do it on mine yet because I need my marking pen. And you're gonna do it all the way down. Once you make your buttonholes, mark your buttonholes, then you're going to make your buttonholes. Make your buttonholes and make sure that you open out your buttonholes and make your buttons on the opposite side. So you're gonna make your buttons on the right side where all the fabric is to the right of you, all right? After you do that, guess what? You are all done with your blouse. Go ahead and style it like I am going to be doing, styling and showing you some pictures here coming up. And if you make this blouse, don't forget to tag me on Instagram at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for liking the video, which was number 140 for me to do a sew along for one of the patterns in that sew along. And this just happened to be Simplicity 9106. Thank you so much for watching and I hope you enjoy and I hope to see you in my next video. All right, so there you have it. That is the full pattern review and the sew along. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. And also, if you make this top, don't forget to tag me on Instagram at Rochelle.Handmade.Designs. So I'll catch you in the next video. And as always, keep sewing.